Hello dolls and welcome back to another episode. This one has been very highly requested and I am so excited to finally bring you this video because today we are going to talk about a woman that is one of the biggest inspirations in my life, someone whose story has always touched me very deeply, and someone who I share a birthday with. Today I'm going to talk about Janis Joplin. I've actually made a podcast episode all about the wonderful Janis a couple of months ago, but because I know that not everyone listens to the podcast and there's also so much footage of her, I really wanted to take that script and kind of rework it into a video. So if you've listened to the podcast episode, a lot of what I'm saying today will be doubling from what I said back then. But I also added some more stories and of course all the wonderful footage of her. As always, I will have all of my sources linked in the description box, but there are a couple of books that I read over the past couple of years that really are the foundation of the research for this video. One of them is Janis by Holly George Warren. It's a wonderful book. It is very condensed of her life. It tells you basically everything you need to know. It's a wonderful read. I also read Pearl, The Obsession and Passion of Janis Joplin by Alice Amburn, which is just another great book, honestly. These books all to me kind of felt like novels because these women have such an incredible way of writing. And I also read Buried Alive, the biography of Janis Joplin by Myra Friedman, who actually knew her. She worked closely with Janis's management, but I'm going to tell you a little more about that. And then finally, I also read some inserts of Peggy Caserta's highly discussed book, Going Down with Janis, as well as her second book titled I Ran Into Some Trouble. These books are a little notorious for not really painting the best picture of her and just being maybe not the closest to the truth. These books are definitely more legends than the truth. However, there were parts in there that I felt like were important to add into this video. But yeah, with all of that being said, welcome to the life of the one and only Janis Joplin. June 17th, 1967, the Monterey Pop Festival in California. On the second day, a relatively unknown band takes the stage, Big Brother and the Holding Company. At its forefront is the singer Janis Joplin. She screams, wails, and sings to bluesy guitar riffs. So emotionally charged, many had never heard a woman sing like this before. Like Jimi Hendrix and Jim Morrison, Janis Joplin would go on to become a legend. It was a meteoric career spanning just 4 years that transformed a rebellious girl next door into a global star. Her uncompromising nature made her music so authentic, but her lifestyle would destroy her body early on. Her singing embodied the spirit of change of the 1960s. Her music and presence were a rebellion against traditional gender roles and the still prevailing racial segregation in the United States. Janis Joplin, with a voice like hers, the audience of the late 1960s wasn't prepared for what they heard. On stage, she could explode with energy or lose herself completely in her songs. Her performances were not just concerts, but raw emotional experiences, a fusion of pain, passion, and sheer power that captivated anyone who listened. With every note, Janis defied convention, proving that music could be a vessel for freedom, individuality, and the raw complexities of the human spirit. I'm quickly interrupting this video to tell you about today's sponsor, Boden. Boden is a British fashion brand. It's just been such a big part of my childhood, and they have this very beautiful, timeless look. I have several pieces that my mom has handed down, and the quality is wonderful. I like to buy their clothes secondhand and new for my son as well. They have something for everyone. And they reached out and asked if I wanted to speak about their new collection, and of course I do. So I got to choose a couple of pieces, and I decided to go with these pants because tell me these aren't the perfect late 60s going into the 70s kind of pants. They're straight-legged. I am very short. I'm only 5'3", and they come in petite sizes. They come in regular, petite, or tall, whatever you prefer, whatever works best for you. I went with petite, and I love them. They fit me really well. They're such a nice and thick quality. Also, if you're new here, I have to say, because I'm gonna put up a try on, I'm 9 months pregnant. I'm about to give birth in 4 weeks, so that's why these pants don't close. However, they fit great everywhere else, and I'm sure in a couple of weeks after the baby's here, I can wear those. And I'm already so excited because they're so truly beautiful and the quality is incredible. And then to go with those wonderful pants, I have picked this shirt that is so timeless. And that is what I mean when I say Boden has this wonderful sense of making clothes. It is very, very timeless. It is buttoned in the front, which is great for breastfeeding and not breastfeeding. It's just a great style. I love the little ruffles and the quality is just incredible. So I truly cannot wait to wear these pieces. I'm gonna link their website and everything down below, and I would love for you to check them out. Thank you once again so much to Boden for sponsoring this video, and now let's get back into the life of Janis Joplin. Chapter 1. From Port Arthur to the Edge of the Map. On January 19th of 1943, exactly 56 years before me, Janis Lynn Joplin was born into the coastal town of Port Arthur, Texas, as the first child of the Joplin family. Her mother, Dorothy Bonita East, was a registrar at a business college, and she was already 30 years old when she had little Janis, her first child, something that was quite rare for the 1940s. Her husband and Janis's father, Seth Ward Joplin, already in his mid-30s, was an engineer at Texaco. The family lived in Port Arthur, a provincial town with about 45,000 residents in southeastern Texas, near the Louisiana border. It resembled a sprawling industrial site with drive-in theaters and soda stands. The numerous oil refineries filled the air with exhaust and foul odors. Most of the white residents of Port Arthur worked in the refineries, and they were conservative and often racist. Janis's parents were the typical American middle-class folks, the friendly family next door. No one, and above all not the Joplins, would have imagined that their daughter would go on to make history with her voice, revolutionary music, and a life so far off from everything Port Arthur knew. For 6 years, Janis was an only child, until her brother and sister, Michael and Laura, were born. The Joplins encouraged their children and supported them. Clever and academically strong, Janis skipped the 2nd grade. She sang in the church choir, where her clear soprano voice earned her recognition. Although her parents fostered her talents, family life at the Joplin house wasn't warm or particularly loving. Janis's friends described her mother, Dorothy, as strict, moralistic, and cold. Her father, Seth, who Janis called, quote, a closeted intellectual, was reclusive but served as a role model for his daughter. In a town where everyone wore the same clothes and did the same things, her father was the only person she knew who was a little different, and Janis, who always felt like she didn't belong, looked up to him. Janis had an almost idyllic childhood, but things changed during her adolescence. She became an unpopular outsider, largely because of her appearance. She developed acne, gained weight, and was considered unattractive by her peers. In her book Janis, Alice Eccles quotes a friend, quote, when you turned 14 in Port Arthur, Texas as a girl, it was like entering a sort of sexual competition. If you didn't have much to show for it, you were out of luck. The popular girls were pretty, but Janis wasn't. She was relentlessly teased for being different. As a young girl, Janis spent her time reading, painting, and advocating for the end of racial segregation. She earned a reputation, rightly or wrongly, as a promiscuous bad girl. Other teenagers thought she was strange and mocked her with cruel names like pig, freak, and creep. In response, Janis began to rebel. I feel like these formative years are so important to understand the person that Janis ended up becoming, because I feel like when you grow up and you never feel like you fit in and you always feel like an outsider, you try to find something outside of the norm. You almost kind of very early on, in my opinion, start to realize that you're most likely not going to get accepted and not get happy leading a regular life. And I feel like that is very largely what contributed to the way that she lived her life. And I'm going to come back to this because it is really interesting. For Janis, there were always these two ways in life. You could either live in Port Arthur, go to school, get a regular job, get married, and live a very civil, kind of like classic, picture-perfect life. Or you could do something completely outrageous. And I feel like as much as she adored being on stage and being a musician, Part of her always wished that she could have been someone who fitted in Port Arthur, because I feel like those wounds that she had so early on from just not finding her peers were really deep, and I think she carried them with her through all of her life. She cast aside the traditional white blouse and skirt of the 1950s, opting instead for miniskirts or loose, baggy clothing. She immersed herself in the words of Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg, prominent figures of the beatnik movement, the American counterpart to the French existentialists and forerunners of hippie culture. And before long, Janis found her place among a group of fellow outsiders. Music became a passion and the form of expression for their nonconformity. The group primarily listened to folk, jazz, and blues, genres that would never be played at a high school dance. They dismissed the rock and roll of the times as too commercial. Their idols were black blues musicians, particularly the Empress of the Blues, Bessie Smith, whose gravestone Janis would later fund, as well as Lead Belly and the Queen of Folk, Odetta. While listening to Odetta's records and singing along, Janis discovered the power of her own voice. Quote, "She just let loose and sounded exactly like Odetta. It exposed us all. We used to sing folk songs whenever we drove somewhere. Well, we still did that afterwards, but it wasn't the same anymore. We weren't in the same league anymore," recalls a friend of Janis. She seems to have found a release for her anger, pain, and energy through singing. But before she became the Janis Joplin the world came to know and love, she was a teenager in Port Arthur with a head full of dreams and a pocket full of change saved from babysitting, errands, and odd jobs. She spent it not on pop hits like her classmates loved, but on a mail-to-order box of lead bell records, blues so raw and unvarnished they felt like the truth pressed into wax. She'd sit cross-legged on her bedroom floor, needle down, playing them over and over until the grooves were thin. Each crackle and moan seeped into her bones. In a place where conformity was a currency, Janis invested in the sound of rebellion. In 1960, Janis graduated high school, and she knew exactly what she wanted to do. Quote, "Anyone with ambitions like mine leaves Port Arthur as quickly as possible. Otherwise, you get trapped, suppressed, and beaten down." In 1970, Janis was a guest on the Dick Cavett Show, where he asked her about her high school experience, and she said the following. Quote, "They laughed me out of class, out of town, and out of state, so I'm going home." I love this quote because I feel like the "so I'm going home" part is so brilliant. It's kind of like, even though these people never were nice to me, even though they never accepted me, I'm gonna go back to them and show them that I have accepted myself and that that is a lot more valuable and that I don't need their acceptance because I'm living a life that I actually like. Chapter 2, Finding Her People and Finding Her Voice. She got into Lamar University and took odd jobs, working for a telephone company, singing in bars, waitressing, and occasionally attending college. Eventually, Beaumont, Texas wasn't the place to be either, so Janis moved to Austin, where she enrolled at the University of Texas. There, she and her friends formed the core of a counterculture group, about 200 men and women on a campus of 20,000 students. Psychedelic drugs, free sexuality, rejection of materialism, and vehement opposition to racial segregation were the group's principles. However, Janis also used drugs to suppress her self-doubt. She anesthetized herself and started drinking heavily. The campus newspaper, the Daily Texan, which she also used to sell on campus, ran a profile on her in the issue dated July 27, 1962, headlined, "She Dares to Be Different." The article began, quote, "She goes barefooted when she feels like it, wears Levi's to class because they're more comfortable, and carries her auto harp with her everywhere she goes, so that in case she gets the urge to break into a song, it will be handy. Her name is Janis Joplin." She joined Lanny Wiggins, who I really had such a hard time finding out more about, so if anyone knows what happened to Lanny Wiggins, please let me know. For some reason, I'm weirdly interested in this person. And Powell St. John, who later wrote a couple of songs for the psychedelic sound of the 13th Floor Elevator, the 13th Floor Elevator's debut album, and their folk duo, the Waller Creek Boys. They were playing bluegrass, blues, country, and folk music, and mostly performing in the backyards of student ghettos. A friend, Freda Sloat, recalled, quote, "Janis was one of those people who practiced late into the night to perfect a single phrase or the transition from one chord to the next. They were all fanatics. You have to be a fanatic to be an artist, and she certainly was." Janis rejected formal vocal training, saying, quote, "They only want me to sing differently." She started to perform regularly at Threadgill's, a venue packed with fans. As the main attraction, she didn't even need a microphone to outshine other musicians. The audience was electrified. Something new was happening. Gradually, Austin's perception shifted. With the eccentricity of the folkies becoming hip and cool, this was the first time in Janis's life she was considered cool outside of her friend group, and she also started to believe that this whole music thing could really work out for her. In January of 1963, Janis left Texas, hitchhiking with her friend Chet Helms to North Beach, San Francisco, to escape the constraints of her conservative upbringing. Quote, "Just to get away," she later explained, "because my head was in a much different place." In San Francisco, the mecca of American counterculture, she began performing in clubs and bars, gaining recognition as a singer and immersing herself in the burgeoning music scene. It seemed like during this period she developed a rebellious persona, or maybe let the one she always had take over. Inspired partly by her female blues heroines and partly by the beat poets whose work she admired, and began carving out a path that would later define her as one of the most iconic voices of her generation. Her first recorded song, "What Good Can Drinking Do?" was taped in December of 1962 at the home of a fellow University of Texas student. At a hootenanny in San Jose, California in the fall of 1962, Janis met Jorma Kaukonen, later of Jefferson Airplane and Hot Tuna. Over the next few years, Janis often called Jorma to join her at gigs. As they continued playing together, the Bay Area's music scene was evolving into the iconic San Francisco movement, where both Janis and Jorma would play significant roles. During a rehearsal for a North Beach show, Jorma set up his reel-to-reel recorder to capture their work. He recorded Janis' beautiful voice while Jorma was playing the guitar. These sessions, which featured Jorma's wife Margarita typing in the background, were later released as the bootleg album The Typewriter Tape. While it may just have been a rehearsal, it holds so much more. Including Janis's original songs and blues classics, the album shares an intimate glimpse into two artists at the dawn of their influential careers. As Jorma notes in the liner, quote, "This is indeed a window into a simpler time when the music truly was everything." However, her time in San Francisco took a toll on her health and well-being. Janis became deeply involved in drugs, trying nearly everything but favoring speed, amphetamine, which matched her high-energy personality and fueled her performances. She also drank heavily, developing a particular fondness for Southern comfort. By 1965, her drug use had escalated to the point where friends described her as skeletal and emaciated. Concerned for her welfare, they threw her a bus fare party and persuaded her to return to her parents in Port Arthur, Texas. Back in Port Arthur, Janis tried to conform to the conventional norms of her middle-class upbringing. She avoided drugs and alcohol, adopted a beehive hairdo, and gained weight. She enrolled at Lamar University in Beaumont, Texas, where she majored in anthropology or social work. According to different accounts, this was a little strange. Any recollections of her at the university, but I couldn't find anything, so if anyone knows definitely which degree she got, I would love to know. It seemed like this was her final try at a normal life, a conventional one last attempt to fit in with the people of Port Arthur. But Janis couldn't let go of her music, the one thing she always felt accepted in. So during this time, she commuted to Austin to perform solo, accompanying herself on an acoustic guitar. One notable performance was a benefit for Texas bluesman Mance Lipscomb, who was suffering with ill health. In the fall of 1965, Janis became engaged to a man called Peter LeBlanc, a man she had begun dating towards the end of her first stint in San Francisco. Peter, who worked with IBM in New York, visited her father in Port Arthur to ask for her hand in marriage, and Janis and her mother began planning the wedding. However, the engagement was short-lived, and Peter soon ended it. Around the same time, Janis sought counseling from a psychiatric social worker named Bernard Giarratano in Vermont. Giarratano later revealed that Janis was deeply conflicted about pursuing a career in music, fearing a relapse into drug use. She often brought her acoustic guitar to their sessions, and her singing could be heard throughout the building. For me, that's the tragedy of her life. It almost feels like she knew what was coming for her when she pursued music, but she couldn't stay away from it. She knew it would lead to her destroying herself, but she also knew she could never be her true self outside of being a musician. Chapter 3: Big Brother and the Monterey Breakthrough. Chapter 3: Big Brother and the Monterey Breakthrough. Despite all of her attempts at a normal life, Janis remained deeply connected to music. She continued writing and recording songs, including an early version of Turtle Blues and an alternate take of Buffy Sainte-Marie's Code-In. These tracks, recorded about a year before she joined Big Brother and the Holding Company, were eventually released in 1995 as the album This Is Janis Joplin, 1965. Ultimately, Janis's time in Texas couldn't quell the desire to return to the music scene. Her attempts at conformity were short-lived, and she soon found herself drawn back to the countercultural world where she would rise to fame. In 1966, Janis's bluesy vocal style caught the attention of the San Francisco psychedelic rock band Big Brother and the Holding Company. Promoter Chet Helms, who had hitchhiked with Janis years earlier, suggested she join the band. He sent his friend Travis Rivers to find her in Austin, where she was performing solo. Rivers accompanied her to San Francisco, but insisted she first visit her parents back in Port Arthur to inform them of her plans. She was heading to Austin instead, before completing the trip to San Francisco. Janis officially joined Big Brother on June 4th of 1966. The band, formed a year earlier with Sam Andrew and James Gurley on guitars, Peter Albin on bass, and Dave Getz on drums, was a key part of the San Francisco music scene, known for their improvisational jazz-inspired style. They played their first show with Janis at the Avalon Ballroom, where they were the house band. Shortly after, Janis informed her parents of her move through a letter. Determined to stay sober, she initially resisted San Francisco's drug culture, sharing an apartment with Rivers and agreeing to avoid needle use. However, tensions arose as drug use among her circle persisted, leading to an emotional confrontation when she caught guests injecting at her home. That summer, Big Brother performed at various venues, including an outdoor solstice concert. They lived communally in Lagunitas, California, often socializing with members of the Grateful Dead. During this time, Janis briefly dated Ron Pigpen McKernan, a founding member of the Grateful Dead. In August of 1966, the band played a 4-week engagement in Chicago, but were stranded after the promoter ran out of money. This led them to sign with Mainstream Records, though early recordings made there failed to capture their live energy. Returning to San Francisco, they recorded tracks like Blind Man and All This Loneliness, released as a single to little success. By late 1966, they decided to swap managers from Chet Helms to Julius Carpin. In January of the next year, 1967, Janis and Big Brother performed at the Mantra Rock Dance, a beneficial for the Hare Krishna temple, alongside Allen Ginsberg, Moby Grape, and the Grateful Dead. Around this time, Janis began a relationship with Country Joe McDonald of Country Joe and the Fish, even briefly living with him in her San Francisco apartment. The band continued to play exclusively at venues like the Fillmore West, Avalon Ballroom, and Winterland, as well as in Los Angeles, Seattle, Vancouver, and Boston. But their big break didn't come until one fateful gig in June of 1967. The Monterey Pop Festival in June of 1967 was a pivotal moment for Janis, launching her from the San Francisco underground to national stardom. Sharing the stage with Jimi Hendrix, The Who, and Otis Redding, Big Brother and the Holding Company, with Janis on vocals, electrified the audience. Her rendition of Big Mama Thornton's Ball and Chain stood out, with Janis's raw, powerful voice and emotional intensity captivating the crowd. The performance perfectly captured the spirit of the times, blending bluesy grit with psychedelic energy. Filmed for the documentary Monterey Pop, the festival showcased Janis's electrifying performance to a national audience, solidifying her status as a rising star. Cass Elliot of the Mamas and the Papas was seen mouthing, "Oh wow," during Janis' performance, reflecting the awe felt by everyone witnessing the band's incredible talent. Clive Davis, the new president of Columbia Records, recalled the moment, quote, "Big Brother and the holding company took the stage, and this howling, dervish, vibrating, exhilarating, electrifying Janis Joplin took the stage. And it clicked in me that whatever the fortune, the luck that brought me to where I am sitting, it did click in that this is my moment." Following the festival, Big Brother's self-titled debut album was released in August of 1967. Initially receiving little attention, Columbia Records later re-released it, adding singles like Down on Me and crediting Janis on the cover. For the rest of 1967, Big Brother mainly performed in California. Their first East Coast tour began on February 16th of 1968 in Philadelphia, followed by their New York City debut at the Anderson Theater. On April 7th of 1968, just 3 days after Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination, Janis and the band performed at the Wake for Martin Luther King Jr. concert in New York alongside Jimi Hendrix, Buddy Guy, Joni Mitchell, and Richie Havens. By 1968, Janis had a car that could even stop traffic in San Francisco, a sleek 1965 Porsche 356C Cabriolet, painted into a living canvas by a friend of her, Dave Richards. It was a riot of swirling flowers, soaring butterflies, cartoon skulls, and candy-colored spirals, a piece of Haight-Ashbury rolling down the street. In a city already bursting with color, her Porsche was still impossible to miss, a statement that life was too short for beige. People waved, stared, smiled. The car, just like Janis, wasn't built to blend in. One fateful night, sometime in the late 1960s, Janis met the Doors singer Jim Morrison. It was producer Paul Rothchild who knew both of them and believed the two could make an extraordinary pair, who invited them to a party in the hidden hills of Los Angeles. He suggested they arrive sober so they could remember their introduction. Both complied initially, but it wasn't long before they slipped into their usual party personas. Despite their inebriation, Janis and Jim hit it off at first, drawn to each other's raw energy and larger-than-life personalities. However, as the night wore on and drinks flowed, Jim's behavior took a turn. Rothschild later described him as, quote, "a disgusting drunk." Falling into a pattern of obnoxious and aggressive conduct, Janis, unimpressed, asked Rothschild to take her home, eager to escape the unraveling scene. As Janis prepared to leave, Jim's advances grew more insistent, undeterred by her rejections. When she refused him yet again, Jim reportedly grabbed her by her hair, attempting to pull her out of a car. In a swift and decisive response, Janis reached for a bottle of Southern Comfort and hit Jim across the head, leaving him sprawled on the ground with a bruised ego and a visible bump to match it. Despite her clear rejection, Jim remained strangely fixated on Janis, his fascination seemingly deepened by her refusal to entertain him. Janis, however, had no patience for his antics and firmly shut down any chance of a future relationship. She even refused to let Rothschild share her number. Even though Jim reportedly tried to reach out, the two never reconciled. Highlights from this era include their performances at San Francisco's Winterland Ballroom on April 12th and 13th of 1968, recorded and released as Live at Winterland in 1968 in 1998, and the Carousel Ballroom, recorded by Owsley Stanley in May of 1968. This recording was later released in 2012 as Live at the Carousel Ballroom 1968. On July 31st, 1968, Janis made her first national TV appearance with the band on ABC's This Morning, hosted by Dick Cavett. Although the original videotape was wiped, the audio survives. Janis later appeared 3 times on Cavett's primetime show, with footage of those performances often featured in documentaries. Her appearances on the show portray her as a funny, witty young woman, eager to embrace life and all it had to offer. By mid-1968, the band was billed as Janis Joplin and Big Brother and the Holding Company, creating tension within the group. Critics like Time magazine hailed Janis as, quote, the most powerful singer to emerge from the white rock movement, and Richard Goldstein of Vogue described her as, quote, the most staggering leading woman in rock, clutching the knees of a final stanza, begging it not to leave. Fans and critics alike urged Janis to move on, emphasizing her potential outside the band. Cheap Thrills, their second album, marked a peak but also revealed challenges. Producer John Simon struggled to capture the band's energy in live recordings, leading to frustration for Janis, who delivered polished vocals. Elliot Mazer refined the tracks, giving the album a raw sound despite most of it being studio recorded. The artwork by Robert Crumb and hits like Piece of My Heart and Summertime solidified its iconic status. Released in August of 1968, Cheap Thrills reached number 1 on the Billboard 200 and went gold. In the summer of 1968, Janis decided to leave Big Brother after their East Coast tour and key performances, including the Newport Folk Festival. On September 14th of 1968, the band played their publicized farewell concert at Fillmore West, although they continued touring into the fall. Janis's final performance with Big Brother, aside from 2 brief reunions in 1970, was at Chet Helms' benefit in San Francisco on December 1st of 1968. Chapter 4: Cosmic Blues and the Cost of the Climb. After leaving Big Brother, Janis formed the Cosmic Blues Band, featuring musicians like keyboardist Steven Ryder, saxophonist Cornelius Snooky Flowers, former Big Brother guitarist Sam Andrew, and future Full Tilt Boogie Band bassist Brad Campbell. Influenced by Stax Volt soul bands, the Cosmic Blues Band adopted a funky, pop-oriented style, contrasting with the era's psychedelic rock. As her career soared, so did her addiction. By early 1969, she was reportedly using up to $200 worth of heroin daily. Producer Gabriel Meckler, who worked on I Got Them Old Cosmic Blues Again Mama, took steps to keep Janis off drugs during her June of 1969 recording sessions. He later shared with biographer Myra Friedman that Janis stayed at his Los Angeles home to distance herself from drugs and drug-using friends. Janis's performance with the Cosmic Blues Band in Europe were captured in various documentaries. Janis, reviewed by the Washington Post on March 21st of 1975, includes moments like her arrival in Frankfurt, where a fan approached her in a bus to express admiration. The chaos of the tour continued with no security present and the stage in Frankfurt becoming so crowded that the band members couldn't even see each other. The film also includes interviews from Stockholm and London, where she performed at the Royal Albert Hall. Released in September of 1969, I Got Them Old Cosmic Blues Again Mama peaked at number 5 on the Billboard 200 and was certified gold by the same year. Reviews were mixed. Ralph J. Gleason of the San Francisco Chronicle criticized the new band, suggesting Janis should scrape them and rejoin Big Brother, while Carl Bernstein of the Washington Post praised her for assembling a group that complemented her voice. The single Cosmic Blues reached number 41 on the Billboard Hot 100, and a live version of Raise Your Hand became a top 10 hit in Germany. Janis' Woodstock performance on August 17th in 1969 has become legendary. She performed around 2 a.m. after hours of delays, during which she drank and used heroin backstage with her friend and occasional lover Peggy Caserta. Despite a hoarse voice and struggles to dance, Janis engaged the crowd, asking if they were staying stoned, and delivered an encore of Ball and Chain. Pete Townsend of The Who performed after her, later remarked, quote, "Even Janis on an off night was incredible." She stayed for the rest of the festival, joining other artists backstage, standing with Crosby, Stills and Nash during their debut, and sitting in Joe Cocker's van with Joan Baez to watch Jimi Hendrix close the event. Janis had an on-again, off-again relationship with Peggy Caserta, which began after the two met in November of 1966, when Big Brother and the Holding Company played at the Matrix in San Francisco. Peggy, one of only 15 attendees, ran a boutique in Haight-Ashbury called Manazidika. This is a made-up word. I have no idea how to pronounce it. one day Janis walked in and wanted to buy a pair of $5 jeans. However, she was unable to pay the full price, so she asked whether instead she could put down a 50-cent deposit. Peggy, impressed by Janis's talent, gave her the jeans for free. Their friendship remained platonic for over a year, even as Peggy had romantic feelings for Big Brother's guitarist Sam Andrew. But when her relationship with Andrew fizzled out in 1968, Janis empathized with her. By the time of Woodstock in 1969, both women had become intravenous heroin users. There are many speculations about Janis' sexuality. In the late 1960s, even amidst the free love movement, being gay still wasn't even close to normalized. She only spoke publicly about her sexuality once. It was on July 11th of 1970, while talking to her friend Richard Huntgren, the Dead's road manager, whom she had known since 1966. They were off stage doing a San Diego gig for Full Tilt Boogie and Big Brother when she said the following that he later repeated to Myra Friedman. Quote, "I hear a rumor that somebody in San Francisco is spreading stories that I'm a dyke. You go back there and find out who it is and tell them that Janis says she's gotten it on with a couple of thousand cats in her life and a couple hundred chicks, and see what they can do with that." Later, in 1969, Janis faced legal issues when she was arrested for using vulgar and indecent language during a concert in Tampa, Florida. She yelled at police officers, quote, "Don't fuck with those people," and was released on a $504 bond. At her trial, she was found guilty and fined $200 plus court costs. Janis also encountered difficulties at Madison Square Garden, including an infamous duet with Tina Turner during a Rolling Stones concert, where she was described as, quote, "so drunk, so stoned, and so out of control that she seemed an institutionalized psychotic rent by mania," according to Myra Friedman in her book, Buried Alive, the biography of Janis Joplin. Reflecting on her performances, Janis told journalist David Dalton that audiences at larger venues like Madison Square Garden watched her with, "Is she gonna make it?" in their eyes. She admitted to feeling most comfortable performing in smaller, counterculture venues in San Francisco. Despite her success, Janis struggled with loneliness and substance abuse. Her performances reflected her emotional vulnerability, something that resonated deeply with audiences. Yet, the disconnect between her public image and her personal struggles weighed heavily on her. Her career continued to soar, but her life remained tumultuous. By June of 1970, Janis had performed at the Bay Area for one last time. Sam Andrew, who had been Big Brother and the Holding Company's lead guitarist before joining Janis's Cosmic Blues Band, returned to Big Brother in the late summer of 1969. By the end of that year, the Cosmic Blues Band had disbanded after a final performance at Madison Square Garden with Johnny Winter and Paul Butterfield. In February of 1970, Janis traveled to Brazil for a much-needed break from her usual lifestyle, attempting to quit drugs and alcohol. She was accompanied by her friend, Linda Gravenites, who had designed her stage costumes from 1967 to 1969. Quote, "She liked clothes that looked like they'd been around 100 years, Linda said. Turkish vests, Victorian blouses, patchwork, velvet pants. Janis dressed the way she sang, unapologetically, with history and rebellion tangled together. Long before vintage was a trend, she treated it like armor, stepping onto the stage draped in pieces that had already lived other lives. I adore this. This is the way that I like to dress. I like to wear things that have history, that have been around for such a long time. And Janis had such a unique and wonderful style that I feel like is referenced even nowadays so often, because she really did her own thing within the trends of the 1960s, and I truly adore that. I feel like seeing pictures of Janis, even if you would hide the head, you would always be able to tell it is her just based off of her incredible style. While in Brazil, Janis met a man called David Niehaus, an American tourist and former Peace Corps worker from Cincinnati. The two appeared as a carefree couple during Carnival in Rio de Janeiro, enjoying a brief escape from the pressures of fame. In an interview with Rolling Stone, Janis described her time in Brazil as a refreshing change, saying she was, quote, going into the jungle with a big bear of a beatnik named David Niehaus and wanted to, quote, dig some other jungles for a couple of weeks. During this period, Janis worked to kick her heroin habit, and according to biographer Ellis Amburn, David's lack of interest in drugs was one of the best things about him. However, after returning to the US, Janis relapsed. Their relationship quickly ended when David saw her using heroin at her home in Lexburg, California. Complicating matters was Janis's ongoing relationship with Peggy Caserta, who was also a drug addict. Janis also refused to take time off performing to travel with David, further straining their relationship. Chapter 5: Full Tilt and the Last Songs. After this breakup, Janis formed a new group, initially called Main Squeeze, later renamed the Full Tilt Boogie Band. The band featured young Canadian musicians, many of whom had worked with Ronnie Hawkins, and differed from her previous groups by excluding a horn section and including an organ. Taking an active role in shaping the band, Janis proudly declared, quote, "It's my band. Finally, it's my band." The Full Tilt Boogie Band began touring in 1970 and received positive reviews, with many noting the strong chemistry between Janis and her new group. In the spring of 1970, Janis reunited with Big Brother at the Fillmore West in San Francisco for a final performance, with recordings included in Janis in Concert, released in 1972. On April 12th, she performed with the band again at Winterland, where both she and Big Brother were in excellent form. A few weeks later, on May 21st, she performed at a Hells Angels event in San Rafael with the Full Tilt Boogie Band, performing under the alias Main Squeeze. Tensions arose as her old and new bands shared the venue. Big Brother Sam Andrew felt her performance lacked the edge she had in her prime, though Nick Gravenites described her singing as stupendous. The Festival Express tour, held from June 28th to July 4th in 1970, marked some of her finest performances. Highlights included a legendary Calgary set, where she jammed with Jerry Garcia and delivered a powerful rendition of Tell Mama, later an iconic MTV video. During this period, she began wearing multicolored feather boas in her hair, having parted ways with costume designer Linda Gravenites due to her ongoing drug use. In August, she made headlines by financing a gravestone for blues legend Bessie Smith, honoring the artist she credited with sparking her love for music. On August 8, she introduced her song Mercedes-Benz at the Capitol Theater in Port Chester, New York, co-written with Bob Newworth and inspired by a Michael McClure poem. It was one of her final live performances. On August 14th, Janis attended her high school reunion in Port Arthur, Texas, with Newworth, road manager John Cook, and her sister Laura. The experience was reportedly unpleasant, and during a press conference, she replied to a reporter's question about entertaining at Thomas Jefferson High School by saying, quote, "Only when I walk down the aisles." In late August, September, and early October of 1970, Janis and her band spent time rehearsing and recording a new album in Los Angeles, working with producer Paul A. Rothschild, known for his work with The Doors. Although Janis passed away before the tracks were fully finished, there was enough material to create an album. The album, which she named after her newly adapted nickname, Pearl, included her biggest hit, a cover of Chris Christopherson and Fred Foster's Me and Bobby McGee. Chris had been one of Janis's lovers. The history of the song is quite interesting. Chris Christopherson wrote Me and Bobby McGee in early 1970. He had recently moved to Nashville to pursue a career in music, and his life was a mix of struggling with his own ambitions and trying to make a living. He was working for a record company when its exec called him and asked him to write a song titled Me and Bobby McGee. His secretary was called Barbara McKee, whom everyone called Bobby. On the phone, Chris misheard her last name. While writing, he was out of money and didn't know what to do with his life. He just parted ways with his ex-wife, Rita Coolidge, and so the line, "freedom is just another word for nothing left to lose," came easily. Although the song was first released in a country version by Roger Miller, it was Janis's version that ultimately won people's hearts. Before Me and Bobby McGee tied their names together forever, Chris Christopherson once came to see Janis play, and left before they could meet. He later admitted he wished he'd stayed and that he'd have loved to talk with her that night. Instead, their first real meeting was through a song. Chris's words, Janis's voice. 2 lives crossing only in music. She would make it her own, turn it into her biggest hit, and leave it behind as a parting gift. Pearl's opening track, Move Over, was written by Janis and reflected how she felt about men treating women in relationships. The album also included Buried Alive in the Blues, a song by Nick Gravenites, though Janis was scheduled to add her vocals on the day she was found dead. The track was included as an instrumental. Chapter 6, The Pearl That Shines On. Janis checked into the Landmark Motor Hotel in Hollywood on August 24th of 1970, near Sunset Sound Records, where she began rehearsing and recording her album. During this time, she continued her relationship with Seth Morgan, a 21-year-old UC Berkeley student and cocaine dealer who had visited her home in Larkspur in July and August. They were engaged to be married in early September, but Seth only visited Sunset Sound Records for 8 of Janis' many recording sessions. He stayed at Janis's Larkspur home while she stayed alone at the Landmark, although she visited him several times and kept an eye on the renovations happening at her house. One of the projects was designing a carport shaped like a flying saucer, and the foundation for it was poured the day before Janis's death. Peggy Caserta later claimed in her 1973 book, Going Down with Janis, that she and Janis had mutually agreed to stay apart in April of 1970 to avoid enabling each other's drug use. By September of 1970, Peggy had become involved with smuggling cannabis through California and checked into the Landmark, which was infamous and known to attract drug users. Janis didn't initially know that Peggy was in Los Angeles, but learned of her presence when a heroin dealer who made a delivery to the hotel informed her. Janis begged Peggy for heroin, and when she refused, Janis reportedly said, quote, "Don't think if you can get it, I can't get it." By this time, Janis had become a regular customer of the same heroin dealer who had been supplying Peggy. In the winter of 1970, Janis's manager Albert Grossman and his assistant and publicist Myra Friedman had staged an intervention with her while she was in New York. By September, they knew Janis was staying at a hotel in LA, but were unaware that it had become a gathering place for drug users and dealers. Grossman and Myra knew that Peggy was a heroin user, but had no idea that she had recently rekindled her connection with Janis. During this period, Janis spent much of her time at Sunset Sound Records and enjoyed driving her Porsche on the winding roads of Sunset Boulevard, often exceeding the speed limit. According to Janis's attorney Robert Gordon, she was known for her reckless driving, though only one member of the Full Tilt Boogie band, Ken Pearson, was ever willing to ride with her. On September 26th of 1970, Janis recorded vocals for Half Moon and Cry Baby. During the session, she and her bandmates made a special 1-minute recording for John Lennon's 30th birthday, which was set to take place on October 9th. Janis, along with Pearson and drummer Clark Pearson, chose to perform Happy Trail as part of a birthday greeting, which was sent to John after Janis' death. Her last recording took place on October 1st, 1970, when she completed Mercedes-Benz in a single take. On October 3rd, she visited Sunset Sound Records to listen to the instrumental track of Nick Gravenite's Buried Alive in the Blues, which had been recorded earlier that day. She was scheduled to add her vocals the following day. Later that day, Janis learned that Seth Morgan had invited other women over to her home in Marin County, where he was shooting pool with them using her pool table. She reportedly was quite angry about this, but also spoke with excitement about the progress of her recording sessions. Janis and Pearson left the studio together, and she drove him to Barney's Beanery in West Hollywood. She had 2 vodka and orange juice drinks there, and according to Bennett Glotzer, a business partner of her manager, she had a friendly conversation with a fan who admired her music. After midnight, Janis drove Pearson and the fan back to the Landmark, where she and Pearson stayed in separate rooms. During the car ride, the fan asked her about her singing style, but Janis mostly ignored him as she conversed with Pearson. When they arrived at the hotel, Janis opened up to Pearson about being scared that he and the rest of the Full Tilt Boogie band might stop playing music with her. Pearson was the second to last person to see her alive, with the final person being the night shift desk clerk at the Landmark, who had met Janis several times but didn't know her well. On the evening of Sunday, October 4th of 1970, Janis Joplin was found dead on the floor of her room at the Landmark Motor Hotel by her road manager and close friend John Byrne Cook. Alcohol was present in the room, but reports indicated that no other drugs or paraphernalia were found. However, in a 1983 book written by Joseph DiMona and Los Angeles coroner Thomas Noguchi, it was revealed that evidence of narcotics had been initially removed from the scene by a friend of Janis. This person later returned the evidence after realizing that an autopsy would be performed and reveal the narcotics in her system. The book mentions that Noguchi had encountered similar cases where friends believed they were helping by removing evidence of drugs, only to return it once they realized an autopsy was forthcoming. An autopsy performed by Noguchi confirmed that Janis died of a heroin overdose, which may have been exacerbated by alcohol. John Byrne Cook believed that Janis had obtained heroin that was significantly more potent than what she and other LA users had previously encountered, pointing to overdose among several other customers of that same dealer on that same weekend. Her death was ultimately ruled accidental. This batch of very strong, very pure heroin has been coming up a lot. I'm gonna link you a video here that I made about Jean de Breteuil, a man who is most likely responsible for that strong heroin floating around in Los Angeles that weekend, and who also felt very, very responsible for her death. This is the most likely scenario. As sad as it sounds and as sad as it truly is, in the end she lost her battle with drugs, and it really breaks my heart, because I feel like when you speak about and you learn about 1960s and 70s rock stars, a lot of them were heavy drug users and never tried to recover. But Janis tried over and over again to get clean. She really wanted to live a good, clean life, but she couldn't. And as I said in the beginning, I feel like this almost was the consequence of the decision she made early in life, where she could have chosen that regular classic picture book life in Port Arthur. She could have just had a regular job. She could have become a social worker. She could have lived that life and probably would have lived drug-free in that scenario. However, she couldn't let go of the music, and music came with drugs, and it resulted in her untimely death. And it honestly breaks my heart, because I feel like Janis Joplin, not only as a musician, but also as a person, had so much more to give to this world. A newspaper clipping from October 5th of 1970 reported the news of her passing. Both Peggy Caserta and Seth Morgan failed to meet her on October 2nd, the Friday before her death, despite Janis' expectations that they would keep her company that night. Peggy stated that Janis was deeply saddened by their absence. During the 24 hours that followed, Peggy did not reach out to explain why she hadn't shown up. She later admitted to waiting until late Saturday night to contact the Landmark switchboard, only to find that Janis had instructed the desk clerk not to accept any incoming calls for her after midnight. Her fiancé did speak to Janis by phone within the 24 hours before her death, but details about their conversation remain unclear. Janis was at Sunset Sound Records at the time, and those present, including 20 to 25 people, according to biographer Myra Friedman, noticed that whatever Seth Morgan said seemed to anger her. Peggy Caserta has argued that Janis' overdose was not accidental, but was instead the result of a head injury sustained after the hourglass heel of her slingback sandal became caught in a shag carpet, causing her to lose her balance. She did acknowledge, however, that drugs and/or alcohol may have contributed to hastening Janis' death that night. After her passing, Janis was cremated at Pierce Brothers Westwood Village Memorial Park and Mortuary in Los Angeles. Her ashes were later scattered into the Pacific Ocean from a plane. Janis shocked the music world, coming just a month after Canned Heat's Alan Wilson and 16 days after Jimi Hendrix, all of whom were 27 at the time. The coincidence led to the creation of the 27 Club mythology. Even in her death, Janis wanted a celebration. In her will, she left $2,500 to her friends so they could, quote, have a ball after I'm gone. On October 26 of 1970, they did, gathering at the Lion's Share in San Anselmo for a wake that was pure Janis. The invitation read, "Drinks are on Pearl," and the Grateful Dead played while friends shared her favorite food, kept the booze flowing, and told stories loud enough to make her laugh wherever she was. No black clothes, no quiet morning, just the kind of night she'd have wanted. Messy, loud, and full of love. In the wake of her passing, 2 books released in 1973 drew significant attention. Buried Alive, the biography of Janis Joplin by her publicist, Myra Friedman, and Going Down with Janis by Peggy Caserta, which included provocative claims about Janis' personal life. Peggy's memoir sparked controversy, especially for its graphic descriptions of drug use and sexual encounters. Her portrayal of Janis was one of many in a larger narrative about the troubled lives of those close to the singer, many of whom struggled with addiction after her death. Janis' own bandmates, including James Gurley of Big Brother, did not achieve sobriety until years later. Peggy eventually published a new memoir in 2018 titled I Ran Into Some Trouble, which offered a more nuanced account of her relationship with Janis, distancing herself from the sensationalism of Going Down with Janis. These books are such a rabbit hole. You can't really find copies. You can find excerpts online. It is so hard to gather this. I would love to get my hands on these copies, but they were only made for such a small time, like especially her first book is incredibly rare. So if anyone has it or knows where I can get it, let me know. But yeah, it's a very sensationalized book, and as said in the beginning, it's more legend than fact. Several artists honored Janis after her death, including the Mamas and the Papas with their song Pearl, Leonard Cohen's Chelsea Hotel No. 2, and Robert Hunter's Birdsong by Jerry Garcia. Patti Smith also wrote a song for her, Lullaby, I Was Working Real Hard, which she performed in 1975. Additionally, Janis was posthumely inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1995, with Chris Christopherson playing Me and Bobby McGee for her. When Janis Joplin died on October 4th, 1970, it felt as though a piece of the music itself died with her. She was only 27, the woman who had burned so brightly, who had roared her way into the heart of rock and roll and refused to dim for anyone. In just a few short years, she had gone from the outskirts of Port Arthur, Texas, to commanding the stages of Monterey, Woodstock, and the Fillmore. Her voice raw and unrestrained, her presence impossible to ignore. She sang like she was fighting for her life, Chris Christopherson said, years later, his voice heavy with loss. The wild-haired girl from a refinery town had taken the world by storm, and in doing so, she had rewritten what it meant to be a woman in rock. The world mourned, but there was also gratitude. Gratitude that she had lived as she had, fierce and unflinching, and that she had left behind something that would never fade. Quote, she was the pearl, Grace Slick once said, and pearls are forever. So that is it for today's video. That is it for the life story of the one and only, the incredible Janis Joplin. As said, I've always felt so connected to her. She has been one of my favorite artists for as long as I can remember. And whenever I hear about her story or reading about her story even more now, really made me so sad because it made me realize how, even though she had a great career, she was only getting started when she passed. She was so young and so desperate to get out, and it really, really pains me to think about that the 2 people she would have wanted there for whatever reason in the 24 hours before her passing didn't come. And it makes me wonder whether because these 2 were zoning her out, she decided to take the drugs and therefore died. We will never know, and that honestly might be part of why she's so mythologized nowadays. But in the end, I feel like she's one of those people who is often remembered for being part of the Club 27 and not remembered for being the insanely incredible artist that she truly was. Because she was so special and she was so wonderful and she really was one of a kind. And I've always, as said, felt really close to her. I can empathize with a lot of the things and a lot of the motivation that she had in her life. And it honestly just breaks my heart that she passed so young. But I would love to know what you think about Janis. If you have any more stories about her, share them in the comments. Let me know what your favorite song was, your favorite memory, whatever you want to share. I would love to read about it. Before I go, I would also love to apologize. It's still loud. I don't know what it is. Whenever I try to speak to the people working around the house, because they're doing big renovations. They're basically repainting the entire house, and also the balcony and everything. They're also sanding down all the wood on the outside and restaining that and working on the roof. So there's just so much going on. And I offered them drinks in the morning, like coffee and stuff. And then I asked them, what is your plan for today? When are you planning to be a little more loud? Is there like a time that you're planning on maybe being a little more quiet? And it never works out. But yeah, it's fine. They have to do their job, and it is soothing, and it is insanely hot outside. So I'm just happy that I don't have to be out there in the boiling heat right now and work on the house. But if you've heard any noise in the background, that is that, and there's not really anything I can do about it. But yeah, I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, I would love you to give it a thumbs up and maybe even share it with a friend. It supports me, it supports the channel, and it would truly mean the world. I hope you have a beautiful day. Go out, enjoy the sunshine, take yourself some time to focus on you and your mental health today, and I will catch you in the next video. Bye, dolls!